Who are the Aboriginal peoples in Canada? The Aboriginal peoples were the first people to live in Canada. What are the three main groups of Aboriginal peoples? The three main groups are the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis. From whom are the Métis descended? The Métis are descended from early French and English fur traders and First Nations women. The federal government placed Aboriginal children in residential schools to educate and assimilate them. How did the Aboriginal people feel about the schools? The Aboriginal people did not welcome the schools, as Aboriginal language and cultural practices were prohibited. Which group of Aboriginal peoples makes up more than half of the population in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut? The Inuit make up more than half of the population of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. Why are the Aboriginal peoples of Canada working towards self-government? The Aboriginal people of Canada are working towards self-government to keep their unique cultures and languages alive and to regain control over decisions that affect their lives. Who have major responsibilities on First Nations, Aboriginal peoples, reserves? The major responsibilities on First Nations reserves are taken care of by band chiefs and councillors. Where did the first European settlers in Canada come from? The first European settlers in Canada came from France. Why did early explorers first come to Atlantic Canada? The early explorers first came to Atlantic Canada to fish and trade with Aboriginal peoples. What three industries helped early settlers build communities in the Atlantic region? Farming, fishing, and shipbuilding were the basis for strong communities in the Atlantic region. Who were the United Empire Loyalists? The United Empire Loyalists were early settlers in the Atlantic region who left the United States during and after the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. When did settlers from France first establish communities on the St. Lawrence River? From France. Settlers from France first established communities on the St. Lawrence River in the early 1600s. Who are the Acadians? The Acadians are the descendants of French colonists who began settling in what are now the Maritime provinces in 1604. Which trade spread across Canada, making it important to the economy for over 300 years. The fur trade spread across Canada, making it important to the economy for over 300 years. What form of transportation did Aboriginal peoples and fur traders use to create trading networks in North America? The Aboriginal peoples and fur traders first used the Great Lakes as a waterway to create trading networks in North America. What important trade did the Hudson Bay Company control? The Hudson Bay controlled the fur trade. Which countries fought in the War of 1812, and which country was defeated? The USA invaded Canada in the War of 1812 and was defeated, which ensured that Canada would remain independent of the United States. Who was the first leader of a responsible government in the Canadas in 1849? Sir Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine, a champion of French language rights, became the first head of a responsible government, similar to a prime minister in Canada in 1849. Who was Sir Sam Steele? Sir Sam Steele was a great frontier hero, mounted policeman, and soldier of the Queen. Which act granted, for the first time in Canada, legislative assemblies elected by the people? The Constitution Act of 1791 first granted the people the right to elect legislative assemblies. What did the government do to make immigration to Western Canada much easier? In the late 1800s, the government built a railway across the prairies to the Pacific coast that made immigration to Western Canada much easier. Who played an important part in building the Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR? Chinese railroad workers played an important part in building the CPR. What was the head tax? The head tax was a race-based entry fee charged for Chinese immigrants entering Canada. Who was General Sir Arthur Currie? General Sir Arthur Currie was Canada's greatest soldier in the First World War. Approximately how many Canadians served in the First World War? More than 600,000 Canadians served in the First World War. What was the women's suffrage movement? The women's suffrage movement was an organized effort by women to achieve the right to vote. When is Remembrance Day celebrated? Remembrance Day is annually celebrated on November 11th. What was the era of rapid change experienced by the province of Quebec in the 1960s called? The era of rapid change in 1960s Quebec was called the Quiet Revolution. Who are the Québécois? The Québécois are the people of Quebec. What does Confederation mean? On July 1, 1867, the provinces we know now as Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia joined together in Confederation to create the new country of Canada. What is the Canadian Constitution? Canada's constitution is the system of laws and conventions by which our country governs itself. What year was Confederation? Confederation was in 1867. When did the British North America Act come into effect? The British North America Act came into effect in 1867. Why is the British North America Act important in Canadian history? The British North America Act is important in Canadian history because it is the 1867 Act which officially created the new country of Canada by joining together the four provinces of Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia legal in Confederation. Which four provinces first formed the Confederation? Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia first formed the Confederation. Which was the last province to join Canada? Newfoundland and Labrador was the last province to join Canada. When is Canada Day and what does it celebrate? Canada Day is on July 1st and celebrates the anniversary of Confederation. Who was the first Prime Minister of Canada? Sir John A. Macdonald was the first Prime Minister of Canada. Why is the Constitution Act of 1982 important to Canadian history? The Constitution Act of 1982 allows us to change our constitution without asking the British government for approval. What part of the Constitution legally protects the basic rights and freedoms of all Canadians? The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms legally protects the basic rights and freedoms of all Canadians. When did the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms become part of the Canadian Constitution? In 1982, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms became part of the Canadian Constitution. Name 2 fundamental freedoms protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Fundamental freedoms protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms include the freedom of religion and the freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression. Name 3 legal rights protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Legal rights protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms include the right to life, liberty and the security of the person, the right to a fair trial, and the right to protection against discrimination. List 3 ways in which you can protect the environment. Ways in which you can protect the environment include throwing waste paper or other garbage in designated public garbage containers, recycling and reusing as many products as possible such as paper, glass and cans, walking, joining a carpool or using a bicycle or public transit whenever possible, getting involved with a local group to protect our natural and cultural heritage. Who has the right to apply for a Canadian passport? Canadian citizens have the right to apply for a Canadian passport. What does equality under the law mean? Equality under the law means that Canadian citizens have the right to protection against discrimination. In particular, discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age or mental or physical disability. Name 6 responsibilities of citizenship. The responsibilities of Canadian citizenship include obeying Canada's laws, voting in elections, expressing opinions freely while respecting the rights and freedoms of others, working to help others in the community, eliminating discrimination and injustice, and caring for and protecting Canada's heritage. Give an example of how you can show responsibility by participating in your community. You can show responsibility by participating in your community through membership in a community group such as an environmental group, by helping your neighbors, by working with others to solve problems in your community, by volunteering to work on an election campaign for a candidate of your choice or becoming a candidate in an election. List 4 rights Canadian citizens have. Citizenship rights include the right to enter and leave Canada freely, mobility rights, such as the right to live and work anywhere in Canada, the right to apply for a Canadian passport, the right to be educated in either official language, the right to vote in federal and provincial, territorial elections, and the right to be a candidate in federal, provincial and territorial elections. What will you promise when you take the oath of citizenship? I swear or affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors, and that I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen. What are the two official languages of Canada? English and French are Canada's two official languages. Give an example of where English and French have equal status in Canada. English and French have equal status regarding their use in the Parliament of Canada, in federal courts and in all federal institutions. Where do most French-speaking Canadians live? The province of Quebec. More than three-quarters of the Canadians who live in Quebec speak French as their first language. Which province has the most bilingual Canadians? Quebec. Over one-third of the population in Quebec speaks both French and English, making it the province with the highest number of bilingual Canadians. Which province is the only officially bilingual province? New Brunswick is the only officially bilingual province in Canada. What does the Canadian flag look like? The Canadian flag is white with a red border on each end and a red maple leaf in the center. What song is Canada's national anthem? Canada's national anthem is O Canada. Write the first two lines of Canada's national anthem, O Canada, our home and native land. True patriot love in all thy sons command. Where does the name Canada come from? In the early 1500s, explorer Jacques Cartier used a First Nations word for village, Canada, to refer to the whole country. European mapmakers later used Canada as a name for all the land north of the St. Lawrence River. Which animal is an official symbol of Canada? The beaver is an official symbol of Canada. What is the tower in the center of the Parliament buildings called? The tower in the center of the Parliament buildings is called the Peace Tower. How many Canadians have been awarded the Victoria Cross? BC, Canada's highest award of honor. 96 Canadians have been awarded the Victoria Cross. What is the largest religious affiliation in Canada? The largest religious affiliation in Canada is Roman Catholic. What is Canada's national winter sport? Hockey is Canada's national winter sport. What is the population of Canada? Canada had a population of about 33 million people. What three oceans border Canada? Canada is bordered by the Pacific Ocean on the west, the Atlantic Ocean on the east, and the Arctic Ocean to the north. What is the capital city of Canada? Ottawa, Ontario is the capital city of Canada. Name all the provinces and territories and their capital cities. Alberta, Edmonton, British Columbia, Victoria, Manitoba, Winnipeg, New Brunswick, Fredericton, Newfoundland and Labrador, St. John's, Northwest Territories, Yellowknife, Nova Scotia, Halifax, Nunavut, Iqaluit, Ontario, Toronto, Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown, Quebec, Quebec City, Saskatchewan, Regina, Yukon, Whitehorse. Name the 5 regions of Canada. The 5 regions of Canada are the Atlantic region, Central Canada, the Prairie provinces, the West Coast, and the North. Which region covers more than 1/3 of Canada? Canada's northern region, comprised of the Yukon, Nunavut, and the Northwest Territories, together cover more than 1/3 of Canada. In which region do more than half the people in Canada live? More than half of the people of Canada live in the southern parts of Quebec and Ontario. One-third of all Canadians live in which province? About one-third of all Canadians live in Ontario. Where are the Canadian Rockies? The Canadian Rockies form the border between Alberta and British Columbia. Where are the Great Lakes? The Great Lakes are in Ontario along the border between Canada and the United States of America. Which mountain range is on the border between Alberta and British Columbia? The Canadian Rockies are on the border between Alberta and British Columbia. Where are the Parliament buildings located? The Parliament buildings are in Canada's capital city, Ottawa, Ontario. Which country borders Canada on the south? The United States of America, USA, borders Canada on the south. What are the prairie provinces? Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta are called the prairie provinces. What are the Which province in Canada is the smallest in land size? Prince Edward Island is Canada's smallest province in land size. What is a major river in Quebec? The St. Lawrence River is a major river in Quebec. On what date did Nunavut become a territory? Nunavut became a territory on April 1, 1999. What are the three main types of industries in Canada? The three main types of industries in Canada are natural resource, manufacturing and service. In what industry do most Canadians work? Over 70% of working Canadians now have jobs in the service industry. What country is Canada's largest trading partner? The United States of America, USA, is Canada's largest trading partner. Which region is known as the industrial and manufacturing heartland of Canada? Central Canada, which is made up of Ontario and Quebec, is the industrial and manufacturing heartland of Canada. Which region of Canada is known for both its fertile agricultural land and valuable energy resources? The prairie provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan and Alberta, are known for their fertile agricultural land and valuable energy resources. Who is Canada's head of state? Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II is Canada's head of state. Who is the Queen's representative in Canada? The Queen's representative in Canada is the Governor-General of Canada. What do you call the Queen's representative in the provinces? The Queen's representative in the provinces is called the Lieutenant Governor. What is Canada's system of government called? Canada has a system of parliamentary government. What are three features of Canada's system of government? Canada is a federal state, a parliamentary democracy, and a constitutional monarchy. What are the three parts of Parliament? The three parts of Parliament are the Queen, the House of Commons, and the Senate. Explain how the levels of government are different. The three levels of government have different areas of responsibility. The responsibilities of federal and provincial governments were first defined in 1867 by the British North America Act. In general, the federal government takes major responsibility for things that affect all of Canada, such as national defense, foreign policy, and citizenship. Provincial and territorial governments look after things such as education, healthcare, and highways. They share responsibilities with the federal government in some areas. Municipal or local governments take responsibility for areas that affect the local community, such as policing, firefighting, snow removal, and recycling programs. Canadian citizens can vote in elections for all three levels of government, like federal elections. Provincial and municipal elections are held by secret ballot, but other rules are not the same as for federal elections. What do you call a law before it is passed? A bill is a law before it is passed. How are members of parliament chosen? The people in each electoral district vote for a candidate of their choice. The candidate who receives the most votes becomes MP for that electoral district. Who do members of parliament represent? An elected MP represents everyone who lives in his or her electoral district, even the people who did not vote for the MP. How does a bill become a law? To become a law, a bill must be approved by majorities in both the House of Commons and the Senate. Once a majority of MPs and senators have approved the bill, the Governor-General gives final approval and the bill becomes law. What are the three levels of government in Canada called? The three levels of government in Canada are federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal, local. Name 2 responsibilities of each level of government: federal, national defense, foreign policy, citizenship, provincial, territorial, education, healthcare, highways, municipal, local, policing, firefighting, snow removal, recycling. What is the government of all of Canada called? The government of all of Canada is called the federal government. How many electoral districts are there in Canada? There are 308 electoral districts in Canada. In which electoral district do you live? See electoral map on back of the appendix. We live in Richmond electoral district, or we live in Delta Richmond East electoral district. Who has the right to vote in federal elections? You can vote in a federal election if you are a Canadian citizen, at least 18 years old, and on the list of electors. You can also vote if you meet the above requirements but have been living outside Canada for less than 5 years or are working for the federal government, the Canadian Forces, or certain organizations outside Canada. What 3 requirements must you meet in order to vote in a federal election? In order to vote in a federal election, you must be a Canadian citizen, be at least 18 years old on voting day, and be on the voters list. What is written on a federal election ballot? The ballot lists the names of the candidates in your electoral district in alphabetical order. What do you mark on a federal election ballot? You mark the ballot by writing an X in the circle beside the name of your chosen candidate. How is a government formed after an election? After an election, the party with the most elected representatives becomes the party in power. How is the Prime Minister chosen? The Prime Minister is the leader of the political party with the most elected members of Parliament. When does an election have to be held according to the Constitution? According to the Constitution, an election must be held within 5 years of the last election. Which party becomes the official opposition? The party with the second most members of Parliament becomes the official opposition. What is the role of the opposition parties? The role of the opposition parties is to oppose or try to improve government proposals. What is a voter information card? The voter information card confirms that your name is on the voters list and tells you when and where to vote. Who has the right to run as a candidate in federal elections? Any Canadian citizen who is at least 18 years old can run in a federal election. Who do Canadians vote for in a federal election? In a federal election, Canadians vote for the people they want to represent them in Parliament. Each Canadian votes for a member of Parliament for his/her electoral district. What do political parties do? Political parties are groups of people who share ideas about how the government should work. Members of political parties hold meetings where they discuss their ideas and opinions. They develop plans for what they would do if their candidates were elected to form the government. The plans they make are called the party platform. How are senators chosen? Senators are chosen by the Prime Minister and appointed by the Governor General. What should you do if you do not receive a voter information card telling you when and where to vote? If you do not receive a voter information card, call your local elections office to make sure you are on the voters list. If you do not have the number, call Elections Canada in. After a federal election, which party forms the new government? After an election, the party with the most elected representatives forms the new government. What is the capital city of the province or territory in which you live? Victoria is the capital city of British Columbia. List 3 natural resources important to your region's economy today. Forests, water, for generating hydroelectric power, and fish are important to British Columbia's economy.